Women, and this is the X-Treme Makeover assignment project presented to NU 713, Organizational and Systems Leadership for the Advanced Practice RN. So here's the table of contents for this presentation. I'll let you look over those for a second. Alright, so introduction and learning outcomes. Miscommunication is common, unintentional, and can lead to mistakes. In this presentation, I'll use an example of miscommunication in the beginning, and then we'll go back later on after we go through some of the concepts and look at that same scenario again. The learning outcomes, I want you to gain a better understanding of how culture within an organization can affect communication. I'd like you to gain understanding of patterns of relating and meaning, and gain an understanding of how listening, talking, and being in a conversation can shape the meaning. So here's the story we're going to look at of miscommunication within the workplace. On a surgical ICU, a nurse is caring for a patient that has become hypotensive. The RN contacts the resident that's on the unit and informs them that the patient's blood pressure is low. The resident mentioned that he wanted to treat the patient by having the nurse give the patient some albumin, and told the nurse that he needed to look at the patient's labs and that he called him back. After a few minutes, the patient became more hypotensive. The RN had the patient in Schindlerberg and called the resident again to come to the bedside. Once the resident was at the bedside, he asked if the albumin had been given. The RN explained that they had not given it because the order had not been put in, and the resident neglected to tell them what concentration, how much, and how fast to run the albumin. The patient ended up being profoundly hypotensive, and after multiple infusions of albumin and initiation of vasopressors, the patient stabilized. After the incident, both the resident and the RN passed the blame on each other, and instead of debriefing and trying to gain understanding of how they miscommunicated. So, there's our scenario, and we'll come back to that in a little while. Until then, let's talk about water cooler talk and cafeteria conversations. It is important to listen to conversations that people are having when they gather together. These conversations can give us insight into the ideologies and the patterns of power within an organization. There are usually common themes to all these conversations, and the common theme within my organization are the policy changes that are going on, new systems that are being implemented, new employees, current employees that are leaving to start graduate education, or the ones that have graduated and are moving on to new roles, leadership's inability to retain experienced nurses, and the amount of inexperienced nurses at the bedside. Continuing on with the water cooler conversations, these conversations can say a lot about what's going on within the organization. So some of the things that people say can give you an insight into the culture. And the things that people talk about at my organization are the employees are concerned about the direction of the organization. They talk about how the organization does not put a premium on experienced RNs at the bedside, that the organization puts a high priority on nurses furthering their education, and that the organization has not consulted with point-of-care staff about implementation of new processes and procedures. So, organization as a conversation. Now that organizations are predominantly filled with people and not machines like in the past, thinking of an organization as a machine is no longer relevant. People have different worldviews and patterns of relating and meaning. Therefore, organization as a conversation is a more modern way of thinking. This makes communication more important than ever. Organizations can be seen as temporary stabilization of themes and habits that serve to organize the experience of being together that take place in the here and now. And an organization's vision or mission statement sets a pattern of meaning that informs us of the organization's idea. So within organization as a conversation, we have patterns of relating and patterns of meaning. The patterns of relating involve how people react with each other. This also includes, and we should remember that preferences of communication within an organization can affect the culture of the organization. This includes rituals that happen during meetings and gatherings. we can always think of the nurse manager maybe sitting at the head of the table. Or in my organization, nurses who have worked on the unit for 5 years or more don't have to float to other units when they're short. The patterns of meaning. Meaning is born out of the experience of conversation that occurs in the living present. We should remember that meaning is a social construct that is deciphered through gestures and responses to those gestures. And we should remember that gestures are symbols and can include emotions, personal reflections, or explanations. There are ways of talking. The way we speak can stabilize and reinforce culture of an organization by making phrases common that remind us of existing values. And we should remember that each time we talk, that's an opportunity to reinforce those values. Continuing with ways of talking, not only can we reinforce existing values, but conversations provide an opportunity to make change. You can do this by using new ways of speaking and using new and different types of languages. There are ways of listening as well. The most important part of listening is to actually pay attention to what others are saying. It is very important to listen between the words and pay attention to body language, tone, and inflection. This can give further insights into the meaning of the conversation. There are ways of being. Mindfulness is described as the energy of being aware and awake in the present moment. Focusing on the here and now and keeping up with what's going on within the organization can provide opportunities to be a part of the organization as a conversation. As a regard to innovation, it is a natural reaction to want to simplify, control, and organize ideas, but this can actually inhibit innovation. Remember that it is okay to embrace disorder and messiness at times. This atmosphere can breed new ideas and allow for innovation. Using rhetorical devices can help at times, like adding on yes and to the end of a sentence. This can get people thinking about how they can improve current practices going on now. So let's go back to the scenario we talked about in the beginning. So this is revisited with new ways of communicating. On a surgical ICU, a nurse is caring for a patient that has become hypotensive. The RN contacts the resident on the unit and updates the resident with a bit of urgency in their voice. The resident, being mindful and attentive, listens between the words, senses the urgency, and comes to the bedside. Upon arrival, it is noted that the blood pressure is trending down. Being present in the moment allows them both to focus on the patient together. The resident orders 500 mLs of 5% albumin. The RN administers the infusion, and after only seeing a marginal improvement, another 500 mLs is ordered. The patient's blood pressure soon returned to a safe level, and this provided the resident and the nurse an opportunity to work together to determine that the drop in blood pressure was related to sepsis. Antibiotics were tailored, and the patient never became profoundly hypotensive or required vasopressors. The patient's outcome improved because the resident and the nurse were able to communicate well in this situation. So, the resident and the RN use patterns of meaning and relating in the second scenario to manage the patient before their condition worsened. So the RN related the condition to the resident in a way that prompted action. The resident was able to grasp what the nurse was meaning in the conversation because the nurse was precise and properly presented the situation. The resident and nurse were also mindful of the situation, were present in the moment, and they were both engaged in the conversation. And the resident listened between the words, not only hearing them, but also hearing the tone of voice that the nurse had when she called her. So in summary, the culture within an organization can affect the communication just as the communication can affect the culture of an organization. Organization as a conversation has patterns of meaning and relating. The ways we listen, talk, and be in a conversation can shape the meaning, and conversations can drive innovation. So we should always remember that language is included culture. In any group, from a family to a corporation, think about what the words you use suggest. Thank you.